Welcome back. In this video, we are going to begin setting up our scene for rendering. We'll do that by adding a background and adding light to our scene, as well as materials. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to my perspective view by tapping on the space bar. You can also come over here to the panel and select your perspective view. And then we'll go ahead and get started by dropping in a polyplane. It's in the center here, and I'm scaling up by dragging to the right. And just pulling out here, you can see the size of it now. So it's a pretty good size. I'm going to right mouse click and select Edge, selecting the first one, going to the last and double clicking, holding down the Shift key and repeating that. With that done, I'm going to do Control E. This is going to extrude, and then I'm going to pull straight up on the Y axis and also drag in some divisions. I want it to be similar to what I have on the bottom of the background. All right, so we've got that done. I'm going to right mouse click and go back to object mode. And now I'm just going to rotate it. That was E on the keyboard, and I'm just rotating it in the Y axis. I want to get that corner placed somewhere behind my scene right here. Now I've selected 3 on the keyboard, and this is giving us a preview of what it will look like when we smooth. There's a little bit of a harsh transition, so I'm going to select Edge and double click and grab those edges and delete them. I'm deleting with Control Delete. It takes out the edge and the vertex. And I'm double clicking on this edge, Shift double clicking that edge, and Control Delete again. So you can now see we've eliminated those edges and vertices, and we've got a much smoother transition in our background. I'm going to right mouse click. I'm going to right mouse click and go to select all of these by dragging a marquee, and I'm just deselecting that little transparent area. And I'm going to open up the hypershade, and we are going to go over to the Arnold selection. And then I'm going to go down to shaders. Make another selection here, and I'm looking for the standard shader, standard surface. Okay, so I'm going to add one of those to our scene. And I'm trying to apply it to the background here. It's not cooperating very well. Okay, so there it is right there. I'm going to just try selecting again on everything. So deselecting the steam. I'm going to right mouse click over this and assign this material to all the objects in the scene. Okay, and it still doesn't look like it's taking it. I'm going to open up my attribute editor with Control A, and I'm going to actually just delete my construction history here as well. Okay, so that's just deleting everything and centering the pivot. Okay, actually it is on there, so I can see it now. There's my standard surface right there, and I just darkened it down a little bit in the background. All right, so I've got my hypershade open again. And I'm just going to go ahead and select another one down here. And I just did a drag and drop. So I grabbed that with my middle mouse and I did a drag and drop onto the background. This gives it its own separate shader, and I'm labeling it up there. And now I can darken this down quite a bit more. This will allow for our computer to stand out. Okay, I'm just closing that out, and I'm selecting this and brightening it up a little bit. Okay, so that's a good balance right there. And we're just going to zoom in. I've also got my steam right here, and I want some transparency to this. So this is my Lambert 2, and I'm just going to bring down the transparency. All right, so I just turned off the grid. Since we have our ground plane in here, we no longer need the grid. And I'm setting up my scene. And I'm going to go ahead and set my camera up here. So I've got my framing here for. So now that we have our ground plane in here, we want to cast some shadows on that. So I already have my ambient occlusion turned on. All right, I'm just turning on my anti-aliasing. That will clean up the edges in the viewport. And then I'm going to come over here and turn off my wireframe on shaded. And we can now see some of the shadowing on here. The next thing I'm going to do is smooth the background by clicking here and go up to a subdivision of 2. All right, now that we have that done, we're going to set up a keyframe for our camera. Over here in the outliner, I'm going to select the perspective camera. I'm going to come over to frame 2 and hit S on the keyboard. That creates a red tick mark down on the timeline on frame 2. And we're just scaling back here, and we're going to go under Arnold and add our first light. So this will be the sky dome light. So this is going to simulate a sky in 360 degrees, goes all the way around the scene. And our background is actually blocking or occluding that light and creating the shadows. So I'm just going down here, touching, selecting perspective, and you can see when I touch the timeline there, it pops back to our stored keyframe. I'm selecting the sky dome now. We've got our attribute editor open, and then I'm going to open up the Arnold render view window and dock it over here on the side. And I'm just going to slide that corner back to not have it covering up our scene right there. I'm going to initiate the render by clicking on that little red triangle. This is going to be our interactive preview renders. And just coming over here, we should see it popping up. So that's our first render right there. And we've got a lot of specularity on the background, and we also just need to adjust some of the exposure as well. It's looking a little bit flat. Let's come over here and increase our exposure. So I'll often crank it up a little too far, and then I'll start dialing it back down. The interactive window is really nice. It continually updates our render as we're working. And that specularity, I'm going to adjust that through the shader. So I've selected the background. Here's our shader material. I'm under specular, and I'm going to just take the weight and bring it all the way down. So we can see that the specularity has disappeared now. And if we slide it up and down, I'm going to probably just leave it all the way at 0. That's bringing it down part way. And ultimately, we're going to replace this background in Photoshop, but it's just sort of a nice thing to have is to have a clean render here. And what we've got is, I think, working pretty well. And I think our camera can probably get adjusted. So I want to just zoom in a little bit more so we can see some of the details. I'm going to slide the window over, select our perspective camera, and I just reset that. Whoops, I accidentally docked that up there, so I'm going to just peel that back off again. I reset the keyframe down on the keyboard by hitting S again. Now that we have the camera set up closer, I'm going to open up the render settings, bring this window over here, and we're going to come under the Arnold tab and then under camera anti-aliasing. If this is set to a low number, we're going to see a lot of noise in our scene. So I'm going to zoom in here and show you. We can see sort of a granular dark look to it. And if we come over here and we start to increase this number, this gives us a much cleaner scene, especially in the shadowed areas. For production quality, you want to bring that number up to 8 or 12. Now what I'm doing is starting some of the additional look dev. So I'm adjusting some of the geometry on my scene here to cast shadows. So I'm actually thickening this up. You can see the shadow over there now. I'm going to do the same thing with these little band-aids up here. So I'm going to push this one out until I start to see a shadow. And I can see that now. So I'm going to grab the one behind it and also bring that one forward. And there's the shadow on that one. Also, this little piece under here that I did, I'm going to scale it up so it sticks out a little bit further and I can see a shadow being cast from that. So this look dev period is when you start fine-tuning both your lighting and getting your shadows in place, and sometimes that means moving some of your geometry around. Here I'm raising this up so we can see it cast a shadow underneath. And all of this is starting to look good now. So just opening this up so we can see it and moving that to the center. We've got our full frame here now. Right, and then I'm going to go ahead and save this out. So I'm under File, Save. Okay, so it's going into my image directory, and then I can choose my file type down here. So go ahead and just type in a name for it. Okay, this is sometimes called a clay or just a grayscale. It's how we typically set up lighting, and then I save that out as a PNG. All right, so we'll come back in the next lesson and continue with Look Dev.